Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Advocacy in Action. I'm your host for today, Liz Byrd, and I'm back with my co-host and today's guest, Kim Durcho, to bring you an episode packed with some trends and insights that we're seeing as we wrap up the first quarter of 2025. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. And the purpose of the series is just to give you a behind the scenes look at conversations that we're having with leaders in their space to bring you some actionable takeaways, some fresh ideas, all that good stuff. So, as I mentioned, today Kim and I are going to be reviewing trends that we're seeing. And at BIPAC, we actually send out monthly pulse surveys to our members on these timely topics and trends that are happening in government relations so that we can share some benchmarking data with our members, as well as inform resources that we're putting out and guide strategies. So in our first quarter, we dove deep into goals and plans that our members are setting for the year, PAC solicitations, and then both federal and state fly-ins. So Kim, I'll kick it off with my first question because I know we have lots of good things we want to dive into. But based on all the survey responses from the first quarter, what were your biggest key takeaways?
Yeah, so if people know me, they know that I love grouping things in threes. So I'm going to give you kind of my top three takeaways.
Okay.
The first is that our members are really focused on PAC activities right now. We are seeing really high engagement with all of our PAC centered surveys, all of our template PAC content in the portal. A lot of our, one-on-one kind of consulting conversations with our members are also focused on revitalizing the PAC. Some folks are looking at starting PACs, and of course, planning for upcoming solicitations. So that's the first one. The second is that I think always top of mind for a new Congress is how to engage new members with your advocacy activities, and then also how to re-engage those that may have represented you, your members, your facilities over the years. So in our January survey, we found that for grassroots engagement, legislator meetings in DC were the most popular activity at around 30% of respondents, which was then followed pretty closely by in-district legislator meetings. This tracks with conversations we've been having about how to plan facility tours, how to prep for spring fly-ins. So people are reinvigorating their PAC programs, but they're also taking a really close look at their grassroots programs as well. And then finally, the third one is that I think we can talk more about this as we go too, but we saw that people are really leaning into mass email campaigns for their PAC solicitations. So I thought this was really interesting, and it actually ranked the highest out of all solicitation methods, which I find interesting. And I think based on Liz and I's first conversation, of this program, I think we both take a little bit of a different tactic when we're engaging with folks. So it was definitely intriguing. Something we should talk more about is, how do you approach trying to hit a number of different people with a broad communication, but also feel really personable. So I think that's something that I took away as maybe a little bit surprising.
Is there anything else that stood out to you or was a surprise, like a trend that you saw in this, or was it really just the email?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think to follow on that, just to expand a little bit, that was certainly one of the more surprising things. Back in February, we found during our pulse survey that 24% of respondents are doing a mass email campaign, but that only 13%, which was the lowest response rate, are doing peer-to-peer. And we know that peer-to-peer works, especially when it comes to making an ask for the PAC. So it's interesting that to kick off the year, people are leaning into more of that kind of broad style campaign. I won't totally ruin the surprise of an upcoming episode, but we are going to have a guest on in the coming weeks to talk about kind of the more human element of fundraising. So this is your notice to tune back in on that topic. But I do really think that out of everything we saw, that was the most surprising to me, was this kind of, I'm just going to shoot off a mass email campaign and we're going to hope that it hits. And I think over the years, we've found that there's a little bit of a mixed bag.
I love that. I love tying back to our first episode too, so definitely listen to that if you haven't, because we talk about all of this good stuff. But I guess focusing in on January, we had over 60% of BIPAC members that cited limited resources were their top challenge for the year. I feel like that's not the big surprise, but how would you suggest professionals with limited resources, big teams, small teams, we've worked with them all, tackle their goals and objectives for the year with these limited resources?
Yeah, so you're right. It doesn't necessarily surprise me, as anecdotally, we do hear this from a lot of people in our space. I think we are all being asked each year to do more with less. So the shameless plug here is that if you aren't a BIPAC member and you're listening, definitely consider becoming one. There's a lot of value in the resources and the community we provide. But aside from that, I think that at the beginning of every year, and especially at the beginning of a new election cycle, you really need to carve out time to do an analysis of your programs from top to bottom. So, what are you doing across PAC, grassroots, and get out the vote that's essential? What are you doing that creates a lot of work but doesn't have a lot of ROI? What are you not doing that would be a great value add for employees and stakeholders? This is the time to really have those conversations internally with your team and your boss. You might find that something you're doing that takes up a lot of time doesn't actually have to. Maybe there are ways to automate some things or find some champions internally that can step up, provide support for your programs, take a little bit of that off of you of having to make every single ask yourself. And then from there, I would also just suggest you really think about how you can be agile with your programs. Be willing to try some things, but also be willing to pause and say, hey, this just isn't working and we need to pivot. I'm a huge fan of the show Friends, and the scene where Ross and team are trying to move a couch upstairs and he's constantly saying pivot always makes me think about that. And there's no shame in it, right? Like sometimes you hit a wall and you have to turn and you just have to be agile. But you really don't know what's going to strike people. You don't know what's going to hit home with people if you don't at least make an attempt. So I would just say also, don't be afraid to try some new things, especially really early in an election cycle when you can kind of work out the kinks so that you're ready going into 2026 and a major election year, which it's hard to say that we're even thinking about 2026, but we need to be.
I mean, the first quarter's already over, Kim. We're already there.
We're already there. It's the end of the year.
I love that takeaway. I guess shifting to February, we talked about PAC being a popular thing that everyone's focusing on. And in February, we focused on PAC solicitations and the timing of these campaigns. There's a lot of great data in that benchmarking report. So, how can members use this data to refine and improve their programs?
Yeah, so like Liz said, there's a ton of great data. We can't cover all of it in a program like this. So we definitely advise, check out the one pagers that we put together with all of kind of the deep dives on this for each question. But, I'll just say I was really encouraged to see that almost 45% of respondents said that they run year round or some kind of continuous solicitation. I do know that once a year works for a handful of organizations. Some people are able to send out kind of that mass email we talked about from the CEO or from someone on senior leadership, and it hits home for some folks, right? Like they do really well fundraising with that type of tactic. But I think most often we see that a consistent drumbeat with some variation in your messenger and your messaging tactic really often works the best, right? We talked about this again, going back to our first episode together, that you need to show some people a message 7+ times to really get their attention on something and to ultimately get them to take some kind of action, whether it's the PAC or your advocacy activities. So, it may be slightly less inside of your organization when they're used to hearing from you. And, it's the employer or it's their trade association. But I think that same concept still applies. And I would just, ask you, Liz, as our resident expert on communication. I mean, do you have tips for folks? Like I'm constantly learning from you. I mean, how do you get people to open your email? I mean, let's bring some of the stuff in from that first episode, right? Like let's give people some takeaways here.
I mean, you need to know your audience. So like it's not a one size fits all approach. Unfortunately, it'd be so much easier if it was. But I mean, your data tells a story. Definitely look at your data and look at it often. Because you can always find something in it if you're knowing where to look. For me, I think having a strong subject line once you know what your audience is responding to. So A/B test. We talked about this last time. It's not as scary as it sounds. And then I think something that we're hearing a lot from our members is smart brevity, so keeping it short and snappy. our employees, our stakeholders, they're getting a ton of emails every single day, every single hour, let's be honest. So just making your asks simple and easy, and then having a strong call to action. I feel like those are some of the elements for an email, like a little checklist that I would have.
Yeah. I think the other I would add is like giving people a number of different ways to interact with your content. So whether it's like within the email or on your PAC website or, through video or in-person kind of content you're providing them, I think people appreciate the option of like choosing their own adventure, right? And kind of getting to yes in their own way and their own path. So I think that also falls into that idea of these like continuous solicitations, and you don't always have to make a hard ask, but if you're kind of giving people the breadcrumbs, right? And like giving them a little something here and there, not always making an ask, but putting information in front of them, showing that you're valuable to them as well. And then, of course, you will make that ask on the backside. I do think people will come along with you on this journey.
Absolutely. And it's not that hard to repurpose content if you just change a few words around, rechange the format, like Kim said, like you can build out a massive content library around a few key like talking points or something. So you just have to take the time initially to map it all out.
Yeah, that's so true. You don't have to recreate the wheel and create a lot of
Yeah.
work for yourself, right?
Exactly. So I guess shifting to March, where we talked about fly-ins, federal and state, we asked our members what they believe make their fly-ins a success. Did anything interesting stand out to you, or what have you seen in your career, kind of tying it back to this survey?
Yeah, so I think two things kind of stood out for me in our March survey, and I think that the data points are fairly closely connected, but we found that over 62% of respondents cited limited resources as impacting their ability to plan and host fly-ins. And then we also found that 33% of respondents believed that strong materials and talking points were a factor, making their fly-ins a success. So to me, these things go hand in hand. I think if you don't have the bandwidth to train your participants, provide them with strong talking points, give them tips for interacting with legislators, and then just kind of generally supporting them leading up to the fly-in and on the day of meetings, it could really dramatically impact the success of your program. And when you talk about, what I've seen through my career, I've kind of seen this go both ways with fly-ins. I've seen programs that offer, a number of training sessions for participants a handful of weeks out. Then they follow up with good talking points and background information on how to kind of craft your advocacy story a couple weeks out. And then on the day of, they do a really nice job of recapping, talking about the issues, making sure people feel like they know how to get from point A to point B just to get their, get all their meetings in, make sure they feel comfortable meeting with legislators. And the ones that do that, I think, find that they have more excited participants, prepared participants, happy participants, right? People that might want to come back the next year and do it again. But on the flip side, if you don't do all of these things and you don't make people feel really comfortable for something that can feel kind of scary for folks that haven't done it before, if you don't take that time to kind of nurture your participants, if you will, people might not want to come back. They're not going to have a great experience. They're going to feel anxious. They're going to feel like they weren't prepared, that they kind of just went into a meeting not knowing what to say, not knowing what their role is. So I've seen it kind of happen both ways. And by and large, the ones that really give their participants kind of that runway to feel comfortable, ask questions, be prepared, are by far the ones that are more successful.
Absolutely. That's, I feel like, just a great practice in general to be following.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting takeaway. So I guess we've hit on all of our poll surveys that we've put out this year. Is there one item that you're seeing that people should be taking more time to prioritize, or some interesting feedback?
Yeah, so this is maybe a bit of a unique take on this question, but I think running our own pulse surveys has really just solidified for me how important it is to keep your eye on trends within your organization. So, we came up with this idea to do these pulse surveys back in, I think it was like late 2023. I started texting Liz and was like, oh my gosh, have an idea. Like, I got the idea from a song. I won't go into whose song it was, but and Liz
This is a
remembers
true
the
story,
conversation.
by the way.
Yeah. And I was like, oh my gosh, this song has a heartbeat in it. Like, we've got to do these pulse surveys. No idea how we both connected all the dots and pulled it off, but here we are a year later running them really successfully, getting great feedback. And I think through this process, with our members being willing to participate and give us this feedback every month, it's almost real time, right? And we're able to re-ask questions and really keep, again, the pulse on what our members want and what their opportunities are, what their challenges are. So I'm not saying that in your organization you would want to survey your PAC eligibles or your advocates every month, but I think that it's really solidified that idea of providing space for feedback, making sure that they feel heard more often than maybe just once a cycle. I really think it can pay dividends. And I think it also gives people some ownership over, in your case, the political affairs programs for your organization, right? It lets you identify gaps before they might turn into problems or missed opportunities. And I think it's a really healthy exercise. So I think that's my biggest takeaway from all of this, is not necessarily like a direct PAC or grassroots or GOTV tactic, but it's really just the idea of providing space for people to give continuous feedback. And I think you can always learn something from that. So that's been just, for me, a huge bonus through this whole process of these pulse surveys.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's nice to see that people want to hear your opinion. And then when you see, like, I'm sure it's validating for our members when we're putting out resources, because when we get those comments or those suggestions, we're updating things, we're putting new things out. So imagine how that, it's all comes back to how you make people feel. So I think I like that takeaway about the surveys.
Yeah, agreed. It is. And people want to know that they're heard. And like you said, I mean, we are taking every single response to, like, Liz and I read all of them, and Liz puts together these beautiful reports, and it's helpful to have conversations with our members and be able to point to actual stats and say, hey, this is what your peers are doing. But like you said, on the flip side, we're also creating new resources based on the feedback we're getting too. So I think for us, it's been huge, and it's been such a great bonus, an easy way to get that feedback from people. So I encourage that in your political affairs programs. Do some surveying, ask people questions, be really open to their feedback, because it could really open up some brand new idea or concept for your political affairs program that could really move the needle.
Absolutely. Well, Kim, that's it. Thank you for sharing all of your
Yeah.
insights. It's nice to kind of touch base on all of these insights that we're collecting and have a little conversation about it. So I know I have some great notes and takeaways. And I just want to thank everyone for watching this episode of Advocacy in Action. I'm looking forward to being able to join Kim in some future episodes again. And that's it for today. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Liz. Thanks for having me on as a guest this time.
Of course.